Welcome to the Sip and Scale podcast, where we talk about everything business, entrepreneurship, and startups. My name is Blendi Muriqi. I'm the CEO and founder of Delegate.co. Each week, you'll join us as we talk with industry experts and business owners, sharing actionable insights to drive your business forward. So grab your favorite beverage and let's sip our way to success. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Sip and Scale podcast. Today's guest is Conrad O'Connell, the digital marketing whiz behind Build Up Bookings. Conrad has a knack for helping vacation rental companies supercharge their direct bookings with smart strategies in SEO, social media, and email marketing. He knows how to turn browsers into loyal guests and make your brand shine. If you're ready to take the stress out of marketing and see real results, you're in for a treat. Conrad's here to share some of his secrets on boosting bookings and building guest loyalty, as well as just in general talk about building his business from scratch. Conrad, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Let's start with your roots. I started in the short-term rental space, and everyone has this story of how they got into what is many would consider a niche market. And you went into a niche market within the marketing space. Tell me about that, how you started.
Yeah, maybe what led me there was somewhat accidental, but it felt intentional once I decided that this was the right spot. Maybe that's the best way to sum it up quickly. So yeah, long story short, I graduated in 2013 from Coastal Carolina University here in South Carolina, and I wanted to do marketing of some kind. It just seemed interesting to me, and I thought I'd learned something from working on actually my father-in-law's business at the time, which was a fishing charter business. And I'm like, I figured out Google Ads, I figured out kind of the website pieces, I figured out SEO, and I was like, this seems interesting. Perhaps I could do this. And I had this degree in marketing, I'm putting this in air quotes for the listener, that was supposed to help me, know about marketing. It really didn't teach me anything, but that's a different story for a different day. So I was like, marketing agency seems cool. Like I found one, I was like, maybe I can convince them to let me work for them. They didn't really have a job opening, but I just kept emailing them until they let me work for them. So that was kind of how I got started. And it basically been in agencies ever since. So from 2013 all the way till today, 11 plus years, I guess at this point, is basically been spent either working at an agency or, being, owning my own since 2016. So yeah, the way things kind of started in the vacational industry specifically was at the time, the first agency I worked for, we would take any type of business, a doctor, a lawyer. If my agency owner I worked for at the time, if they had a credit card and they needed marketing services, he would take them as a client, right? He wasn't very picky. But we had this one client that we worked on that was kind of a boutique hotel chain. That was kind of their origins. And that type of marketing felt very interesting to me. There's something about just the travel planning process and all those kind of different elements as it related to paid search, all the competition, but the fact that we could still help a small business, it just appealed to me. So basically, starting down that path led me eventually to work for an agency that was kind of more focused on vacation rentals. This was back in like 2014, 2015. And then I worked there for a while, got some experience, and then decided to hang up my own shop back in 2016. So that's kind of the origin of, it felt like a series of accidental decisions. And then in 2016, when I decided to come out and do Build Up, then it felt like an intentional decision to focus on the industry. I knew it was good. I know we could do good work for those people. And that's when I started to kind of focus on that side of things.
You mentioned that initial experience with like a hotel company, hospitality company. From just the marketing perspective, what is interesting about doing marketing for this industry versus, your run-of-the-mill lawyer or accounting firm?
Yeah, I think the trackability side of it was always interesting to me. So I think I'm one person who doesn't connect a lot with this idea of like doing only brand marketing. Like the idea of like I would have not been the person to do well marketing Yeti. I don't know if you're familiar with the brand Yeti, but It's like their whole marketing is basically like we make products that are solid, they work well, we have coolers and cups and things like that. But all Yeti's marketing is just like people using Yeti doing cool things. That's basically what it is like you can associate with it if you associate with that person who does that. Type of marketing doesn't connect to my brain. I'm maybe a little bit more analytical. I'm a little bit more like, show me how it's actually working. Like I would have run ads for Yeti that would have done so badly they would have fired me on day one. So that's like not my flavor or brand of marketing. So I think the thing that I like about it is that a lot of what we do is very trackable. It's very understandable. And it's really awesome to see the impact you do, the marketing work you do, impact a small business. I think that's always something that I've just grown to like and really enjoy, is that you hear from a client or we talk to a client and we can see like them going from like no traffic on their website to a lot of traffic on their website, which for them might be going from like 1,000 visitors a month to like 10,000 visits. I find that a little bit more fun and appealing maybe than a site that's already doing well. It already has 100,000 visits a month. And then we, get 2 or 3% more gains. They're not fun, but it's not like my favorite thing to do in the world. So I think it's just like seeing the tangible impact of what we're doing. and giving clients like more control, or like working with small business that feels like they can do more now because they have more, I guess, like someone on their side kind of fighting for them, which I think is not always the case with a lot of, and I run my own small business. I know what it's like to feel like people aren't kind of necessarily on your side. The big OTAs are going to come get you is kind of a common trope in the short-term rental vacation rental industry. I don't think that's that true, but I think it's got to build some kind of, spine of your own to like stand up for yourself and actually figure out how to market your business and get growth. So that's the piece that's always appealed to me the most.
I was just listening yesterday to a podcast, My First Million, and they had Isaac French. Have you heard of him on the podcast? So
For sure.
he built something live oak. He built a
Live
oak lake, and he was talking about the experience that he had where in a short period of time after opening his resort, he got kicked off of Airbnb. And he was forced in that scenario to just start getting direct bookings, bringing in social media influencers to increase their direct bookings. And it worked so well that he didn't necessarily need Airbnb. That's like almost like an edge case. Most people that are trying to increase their direct bookings don't have that experience. What do you think are like some of the biggest pitfalls or mistakes that people make when they're trying to increase their direct bookings and like wean them off of the OTAs?
Yeah, everyone seems to always point to budget. They'll be like, well, Airbnb is going to outspend me, or Vrbo is going to outspend me, or something like that. I've always been of the mindset that it's not the budget that matters, it's the profitability of whatever you're doing that matters. So if you're spending time or money or both, which is kind of often what we're doing in marketing, what am I going to do that's going to hopefully cost the least amount of money and take me the least amount of time that's going to get the best impact? So I think the mistake people make is they try to think of themselves like they're competing against this large OTA when they're not. They're just competing for the attention of like 50 people every year. Let's say they need 50 bookings a year for it to be successful. That's how many bookings they need to generate, right? To be 100% dependent, or away from the OTAs. They don't think about that though. They think about like, oh, how am I going to compete with, this large platform? How's all these users? The answer is you can't, and that's not the point. I think that people just get the game wrong is kind of my first reaction to your question there.
Yeah.
Then when it comes to like tactically, I think they try to go to step 7 without covering steps 1, 2, 3. Like I read a book last year, and maybe we could talk about it at the end or something like that. But one of the main things I talked about in like chapter 1 and 2 of that book is basically like have a brand name that people can find online. That sounds simple, but if you name your property like the mountain cabin, or like that mountain cabin in, whatever destination, that's not a good name and people can't find you. Like that, you're actually failing like the first test amongst 20 tests that you're going to need to take to get a lot of direct bookings. And people actually don't think about that like very foundational basic level of like what the property is, how people can find it, how people will search for just that one listing before they get over to the more advanced tactics and techniques. So I think branding and just like coming up with the name of a property is often where people make a lot of missteps. Never mind all the things they do wrong after that. Maybe we could keep going if we want to. But when it comes to building something, I think it's, one thing we didn't talk about yet is like property itself has to be something that people actually desire, right?
Yeah.
Like I think, Isaac's story is an example of there was no data to back up what Isaac did. He couldn't go compare Live Oak Lake to other properties in Waco, Texas. There was nothing else to refer to. And that turned out to be a good thing, right? And I think in most situations, that's probably a good thing. And if you kind of understand the flair of hospitality and what people expect, what people want, he was the example of like the Henry Ford quote, where it's like, if I asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. If I asked people in Waco what they wanted, they would have said they wanted a house that was like a little bit bigger, a little bit nicer, maybe a little bit cheaper. That's what they would have wanted. Instead, he went in a very different direction. And yet he found a very willing and very eager and hungry, crowd of people that were willing to book with him. So I think that's the Isaac success story, is that side of it, which is that maybe you have to break the mold a little bit and build something that people will want, even if they're not asking for it specifically. I think that's what you can learn from kind of his story and what he's done. Then a lot of excellent execution layered on top of that, of course. But he started with this idea of like, this design will look better. This the way it's laid out is nice because the plot land, like all those kind of pieces of the story, I think matter quite a bit. Because if you took the same playbook and ran it and the properties didn't look interesting, they were like trailers, it wouldn't be a success story, right? Like the design was part of the success that he had in getting people to book direct, because people saw it and they went, that looks interesting, I want to stay there. And I think people often, struggle. If you have the same condo as everybody else, direct booking is going to be extremely hard. It's not impossible, but it's going to be like pushing a rock uphill, right? It's going to be really, really hard. If you have a product that people are drawn to, like the Isaac example or countless others, your direct marketing is going to work better because people are going to see it and go, I want that. And they're going to be drawn into it. Like, they're going to want to click on the website and learn more, not see it and go, who cares? Which I think is where a lot of people fail in direct marketing.
Yeah. I think another that was mentioned by him that is a value proposition to really investing in direct marketing campaigns and branding is the value you put on your property management company, the property, for example. In his case, because he doubled down on that direct booking website and Instagram, the value of those properties increased. So instead of like when he sold the properties, instead of making $3 million, he made $7 million, let's say, because there was already an established brand. Is that a value proposition you send to them? Listen, like, what is your long-term goal is to build something that's sellable. Having a brand and starting with direct marketing is the way to.
I think there's a really easy and simple to understand kind of measurements and analytics for that question, which is that how many people go on Google each month and search for the name of your company or like the name of your individual properties. So that can be a really useful, just simple KPI or simple metric to understand if you're doing branding well. Like people, I've met a lot of like, I would say overly brand focused entrepreneurs in our space over the last few years. And I think they like the idea of what it looks like, or they want to focus on design or the way it looks and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, okay, cool. Like there's some interesting looking brands that have come out of, the growth that we've had over the last few years. But if no one cares, then if people aren't looking for it or seeking it out, then it doesn't matter. So I think the challenge with branding in my mind is not doing something unique or novel or new. That's part of the problem, maybe. The other problem is it what people actually want? And are they then going and seeking it out and looking for it? I think that's what really matters. So if you go in Google and see that, I could see this data in Search Console, for example, 10,000 people a month are searching for the name of the largest clients we work with. They'll have like 10 or 15,000 people a month that just search for the name of that company. I'm not talking they search for like cabins in an area name or vacation rentals in an area name. I'm saying they look specifically for that company. In my mind, that's the best you want, right? They're actually not considering other alternatives. They're not considering Airbnb or going to Verbo or anything like that. They're actually just going to Google and going, who I want to stay with? I want to stay with that company, whoever that company happens to be. Or in this example, Live Oak Lake, right? They want to go stay at that place. Now, they're often influenced. This is what I always say, right? No one woke up this morning and said, I'm going to search for that thing without being influenced by something else previously. So like social is often that driver of awareness and influence that then drives to search traffic, which is where search sometimes gets over attributed. And I'm the search guy, but like it can get over attributed with brand search. I think that's the piece that people don't understand is if you're not driving towards that of like people actually seeking you out or looking for you, then all the fancy spreadsheets or like all the fancy design elements on a website don't matter if people aren't looking for you. So I think that's like one of the best ways to measure if a company is going to be successful is if I go look at their analytics and I see like lots of people are looking for their company, I can fix the rest of the problems usually, right? Like their technical SEO problems on the website, or they're not doing email marketing, or their ads are poorly targeted. Those are all very fixable things that people are actually looking for that company and seeking it out. That's like one of the healthiest signs I think that I can find early on.
How is that changing? Because I hear the way people search and the way people find products, services, accommodations, it's not the way it was 2 years ago. For example, I went on a trip. I was in Europe, in Albania. I was looking for a hotel for a weekend near the coast. I went on TikTok, for example. I went straight from TikTok to the website. Do you now shift in marketers like yourself looking at analytics based on the socials and not necessarily Google, or is Google still the best sort of predictor of branding, of how well a brand is doing?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, is there some erosion that's happening? I think so. I think that's fair to assume, particularly with like these large language models are now edging into the search space where they weren't, to your point, 2 years ago. So like Search GPT is not really a thing at the time that we record this. Perhaps we'll listen to this in a year and a half and go, wow, that's now 5% of the market or something like that. That's a notable change. Or like Perplexity. We have clients where like I look in their analytics now and I see like consistent referrals from Perplexity. That was not the case a year ago, right? Now, is it more than 3% at this moment in time? I don't think so. Like what you're describing, the idea of people using TikTok like a search engine, I've seen a lot of kind of articles and thoughts about that. I don't disagree. I think maybe it depends on your age. Obviously, you're a younger guy. I think obviously TikTok skews very young. So I think that can certainly come into the fold where the new generation is brought up on different, interfaces are different. It's almost like you can kind of fit generations roughly to a social platform at this point, a social network at this point. It's so funny. Facebook started as like for college students, and now it's like the boomers that dominate Facebook. Yeah. And you're 25 to 45 is going to live on Instagram, and let's say you're 15 to 25 is probably going to be on TikTok. But these things are like bell curves, right? There's always people who are older on these platforms, and there's always younger people on these platforms. But the chunky middle is kind of broken down kind of roughly by these generations, right? That's how I think about those three examples, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. So is that happening? Absolutely, of course. Is it taking a meaningful percentage of Google search share at this moment in time? I don't think so. I don't see enough data to indicate that today, but things are changing all the time. So just because that's not the case today, it doesn't mean that will not be the case 2 years from now, where I go, wow, or even 5 years from now, if you've been ignoring TikTok, perhaps you will end up being in a very horrible spot because people are searching, and then your competitor has 10,000 videos in their library and you have two, and you're like, man, I'm really behind the eight ball. All these younger people are coming up and searching TikTok to look for cabins in my market, and I'm so far behind because I've done so little in that channel. So I think the trouble with those small businesses is that they can't do everything. So they have to pick the 2 or 3 channels that they can execute on some level of quality, some level of consistency, and so on and so forth. So my kind of belief is that any marketing channel can work well with enough volume. Like if I could only do TikTok marketing and I could only market one, through that one channel, but I had an unlimited budget in that one channel, I could probably get some success, some damage. But it probably would be less effective than like doing some level of that, but then focusing the bulk of my efforts on like that 80-20, right? Like Google is going to drive the majority. I should probably focus on that until I find my dollars or my time is better spent somewhere else. So that's kind of my take on it. It's not like, I think a lot of people like to write these marketing headlines where it's like TikTok is going to kill Google search. Like these are very common tropes that I've seen now for 10 years at this point. And Google search isn't dead. Yes. Yeah. Like emails yet. We've been told email marketing has been dead now a dozen times. And here we are still sending emails in, September, October of 2024, and they're still working quite well. Yeah. So I think you've got to have an open mind. I think that's one thing you shouldn't do is shut your mind off and go, I'm not going to ever run TikTok ads, or I'm not ever going to focus on TikTok as a marketing channel. But I would question what you're giving up to do that. That would be my question for the average small business owner.
On the email side, being in this business for a while now, have you seen a decline in open rates from emails, or it's stayed consistent over the last few years? Like, is there a trend? Is there a shift in the way people get information or subscribe to information? Has that changed since you first started?
I think so. I think people are a lot more selective now of who they subscribe to. And I think that a lot of software features, particularly in Gmail, have made it very obvious and clear that this is a promotional email. I don't want to focus on this in my inbox, like with the whole tabbed interface that came out several years ago. I think that's been a continued kind of path for Google to go down, is like, we have separate inboxes basically almost for depending on who you are or why you're sending the message out and stuff like that. Yeah. So I think it's fair to say that like your open rate is probably worse today than it was 2 years ago. If I'll go back to my earlier point, if you have something that people are not particularly interested in, right? So like we have clients, for example, this has been the case historically. If we have a client in an urban market, people often come and stay in an urban market, even like a vacation rental type product, but they did so for a work conference, or they did so to visit a family member, or they don't really have much like affinity, like I can say, because I don't think it's a bad thing. We had a client in New Orleans for a while. Email list that was growing rapidly, healthy company, great reviews, everyone loved staying with them, right? But their emails got a horrible open rate. And like when we dug in further, we were like, these people are not going to come back again to New Orleans, not because they didn't enjoy it, or they didn't have a good time, or the stay wasn't up to their standards, or they weren't happy. It's just not a repeat destination, right? They went to New Orleans for this one conference. They're not interested in coming back. It is what it is. Like I'm on the list, I think. I forget where VRMA was. I think 3 years ago it was in Sedona or somewhere like that. I think we're headed back there this year. I've been in one of those email lists for like 3 years in my personal email. And I'm just like, I'm not going to come back to Sedona. I had no problem with Sedona. It was a good stay, but like me and my wife, that's not appealing to us. We just don't want to do like the desert vacation. So you can email market to me till they put me in a pine box. Like, it's just not really going to move the needle for me meaningfully. So I think, as with all things marketing and branding and advertising, if the email doesn't move people in a certain way, if it's overly promotional, if it's overly me, click here, book my properties, I think that can sometimes go the wrong direction. A lot of our email marketing team is focused on sharing information. Here's what's going on. Here's what's happening. And oh, by the way, we have some properties here at the back end, right? It's a little bit more like entertainment mixed with
you're selling the experience. You're selling the potential experience there. Like Miami, for example, you have Art Basel, right? You would sell Art Basel to the person, not necessarily the accommodation, but the accommodations is something you would have on the back end. Is that something? So like when you're having consultations with clients, is the marketing productized to a point where it doesn't matter where you are in the United States, you guys sort of follow the same formula? Or are you really looking now at the location, as you said? So if you're like in New Orleans, the way you're tailoring your marketing solutions to the client changes based on location.
Yeah, I think so. I think we found certain the right word, will end up with better outcomes at the end of the day. So for example, let's say we take on a client who's in the same market, which we don't do, by the way, as a full service agency. But let's just say, for example, we had 2 clients in the same market. One has been in business for 2 years. One has been in business for 20 years. Well, the 20-year company actually probably has a lot of emails that we can market to. The 2-year-old company probably doesn't. So like the email marketing will work better for the 20-year-old company because we could do better segmentation. We can do better targeting. We can take that list and then pop it into custom audience targeting on Facebook and Instagram and so on and so forth. And all our stuff kind of works a little bit better if we have, that going for us. That being said, though, the new company might have a new approach to things. They may be signing more modern properties. They may have a better sense of design. They may be focused more on interior layouts. They may do a better job at videography. So maybe we have more video assets that we can market with a newer company that an older company might not have the same resource or may not be focusing on that same thing. So I think there's fundamentals, there's principles. Like we kind of think of these buckets as like search, and then there's an organic and paid component to search. Social, there's of course an organic and a paid component to social. And then email marketing, we think of those three pillars as like some of the most steadfast things to focus on. But within that, we have clients that do a little bit of email. We have clients that do a lot of email, one every week. We have clients that do an email once a quarter. So within that channel, you may have different levels of frequency, different levels of content that you're able to share. Maybe we have a client that shuts down seasonally. So I think he's shutting down tomorrow, if memories, for the season. He's in a very cold weather market here in the States. Once the people kind of stop coming, he's, I'm just going to shut down. He goes down to Florida for the winter, and then he comes back up in the spring, right? So it's like, we actually don't want to stop email marketing for him, even though you can't actually book it during the winter. But he'll send stuff like, Merry Christmas, like, can't wait to see you next year. Like, that's the content of his email during the off season, right? It's not like, click here to book now. He doesn't even open his calendar until like April or May time frame, right? So it's like, each thing is going to require its own strategy. But like, I would have a hard time ever telling this particular client, just never send an email for 6 months. People just forget about you, right? So I think it's finding that balance and finding how to best use those channels to work in your favor.
I feel as if the return on investment of a service like yours is a lot higher for markets that have this recurring theme of people, families, large families that come there every single year. Where you mentioned like, a place, an urban center that people go to for travel, for work, for example. That's where it's a lot harder to capture reservations from people that have stayed maybe once in the past. Would you say that that's true?
I think broadly speaking, I will say sometimes the destination is highly vacation and tourism driven, but it's not a very high repeat booking destination. So I'll give you a great example. Hawaii, I'm not sure if you've been to Hawaii, but particularly for people on the East Coast, they go to Hawaii one time in their life. So if you're from New York, if you're from the East Coast, I'm from South Carolina, or I live in South Carolina now, I'm from Massachusetts. Someone like myself and people I know might go to Hawaii one time in their whole life. Yeah. People in California and people in Oregon and Washington State and British Columbia, Canada, they might go to Hawaii a lot more regularly. Like I've been to the Bahamas 4 times in the past 10 years or so. So to them, it's like, to us, it's easy, right? We get on one plane, we're there in the Bahamas. So you get on one plane, they're there.
You're targeting them differently, right? So like you would be targeting people on the West Coast, because there's historically there's a higher likelihood of them becoming repeat customers.
That's true, but I will say this about the client that we worked with in Hawaii. When people come from the East Coast, they tend to stay longer and they tend to spend a lot more money. Mm-hmm. So if we run campaigns for people on the East Coast, our average booking values for one client that I worked with in Hawaii was well over $15,000. So even though the repeat booking rate was extremely low, people, if they're going to come to Hawaii, my wife said the same thing when we went to Italy this year, I'm not going to go for a week. There's no way. If I'm going for at least 10 days. I really would rather go for days to really get over there, settle in, have a great time, have fun, and then come back. So that's an example where I may want to exclude people on the East Coast if I'm marketing Hawaii, but I may not, depending on the type of properties that person has, what we're actually promoting, what we're talking about. And that client that I'm thinking of in Hawaii had less than a 10% repeat booking rate. So 90% of their guests every year were brand new, had never been with them before, but they were phenomenally successful with direct marketing because people went to go search Hawaii. They found them very easily. They were visible in Google Ads. They were visible in search. They had good email marketing on the back end. And they knew that people planning a trip to Hawaii, particularly East Coast people, it would be something they might plan for anywhere from 90 to 180 days in advance before they actually make the reservation. And then when they make the reservation, that could be 90 or 180 days from their stay. So they could be easily a year time frame from I'm thinking, I'm searching, to I'm actually walking in the front door of a vacation rental. And there's a lot of steps between that can be covered by email marketing, by retargeting, and so on and so forth. So I think what you're saying is true most of the time, but I think there's carve outs and examples, particularly for high ADR properties or very luxury properties where it's a one-time thing. But that one event is so valuable from a marketing and booking perspective that it's worth realizing that my LTV is going to be this one booking, but it doesn't mean that it's not profitable to market to those people.
Yeah. Another thing that comes to mind is like urban centers that are known for like bachelorette parties, right? So you might one time, ideally you get married one time in your life, you have one bachelorette party and bachelor party. And with markets like that, you don't have as many repeat customers, or that person may not have times, but maybe their friends or the people within the group may come, which then brings up the question of like, when you're helping with marketing, how do you get property managers to collect multiple emails across a party, because that's valuable information as well, right? So if you have like a group of friends going to, let's say, Nashville, getting each and every person's contact information to retarget might be useful to increase the lifetime value.
Yeah.
How do
Yeah.
you go about that?
I think stay fi is the safest, best way of doing that.
Okay.
Because ultimately, when you're going somewhere, what's the first thing you're going to do if you're going to connect to the Wi-Fi? You know, so I think that's the safest way of doing that. I think the next best thing is probably a guidebook. That gives you a little bit more density, a little bit more concentration of, hey, I'm coming with my 5 friends from college, and I'm going to send them the guidebook so they know where the property is, and we're all going to meet up at the spot and stuff like that. A lot of these guidebooks now can be gated based on email addresses. So when I send it to you, you put in your email. When it comes to me, I have to put in my email and so on and so forth. So I think that's kind of a second best option. I think the worst option is like asking people to volunteer that, or sending some kind of like rental agreement where it's like, sign here, give me your email. That's successful. I'm fine with that. But then, tell me the 5 people are going to be with you. People just start to get very sketched out by that very quickly. So I will say this, you'll gather more by asking than asking. That's true, right? So like most people don't ask, so most people get nothing. So if you ask, you're going to at least get some level of compliance, right? That's true. Although some people may not want to give it, some will. So that's one kind of nudge in the right direction. StayFi is the best because it's like in that moment, you just want the internet. So if you could just enter in your email, you get it. It can then go in the system automatically. I know when you're staying. I know what property you're staying in. I think that's the premier solution. Everything else in my mind is kind of a distant second and third.
Yeah. Let's shift focus a little bit. Now, we talked a little bit about nitty gritty of marketing in the short-term rental space. I want to shift gears to, the scaling of your marketing company. So, you've been at this for a few years. Tell me about how you actually grew the company thus far to what it is, how many employees you guys have right now, where you are right now, and where did you start? And that the process and kind of becoming a business owner and you're a full-time entrepreneur.
Yeah, I mean, I say that I own an agency, but it wasn't that way at first. I mean, in 2016, it was like I was a freelancer, if I'm being honest, right? It was just me doing projects for people, and there was nobody, there was no build up bookings. There was, he was doing all the work himself, literally 100% of it. Back from, let's say, I would say all of 2016, a chunk of 2017, and that was actually, we talked about this previously, the fact that I hired my first kind of part-time, like 4 hours a day, a Filipino-based VA in the very, very tail end, I think, of 2017 or the beginning of 2018 was when I was like, oh, I can actually hire someone to like help me with some of this, some of these pieces. But even back then, my idea they existed. It was just me doing all the work and, starting to realize that I could have some things being done by other people. And that's kind of the direction that I went way back when. So yeah, I mean, today, where we stand today, I could give you some of the details throughout the process, but where we stand today, we have 13 either full-time or full-time equivalents. We probably have another dozen contractors on top of that might do like one specific thing for us or have one specific skill set that we use, that sort of thing. We've got over, I would say like 75 clients is maybe a fair way to describe that. Depends on how you want to break down clients. It's always a debate we have internally. When one client has multiple sites, is that one client or is that multiple clients? It's something we debate internally. But I mean, I think that throughout this like last, let's say 5 or 6 years or so, like there was this era pre-COVID and then an era post-COVID is the way I'm like thinking about my business. And pre-COVID, I think we were just growing very slowly and linear, in a very linear fashion. It was basically, I was very active in Matt Landau's forums at the time. This was like 2016. And he had this mantra he would repeat a lot, which is help, don't sell. So I go in his forums and I would just help people that have a question. And I genuinely wasn't like trying to like sell them anything or like book a call with them or do any sort of outbound or like marketing or anything like that. They just had a question. I would give them like a very detailed and what I thought was like a correct answer based on my experience. And if you do that enough, people then just come to you without you really prompting or asking for it. So I think the best thing I did was like go into Matt's forum every day, from 2016 until 2018 and just help as many people as I could. And then I started to get other opportunities. Like opportunities presented themselves when people saw that I was trying to help or be genuinely useful or give some ideas or like, hey, I've thought about this. I think this is the best way of doing it, not this way. And I think that's where a lot of my early growth came from. And then from there, I mean, we've done so many different marketing tactics for our own agency over the years. That's the call I had before this one, funny enough. I'm just thinking about how we can keep improving and doing better. But I think a lot of it comes down to finding who our ideal client actually is, like who our ideal customer actually is, being very specific. Like we talked about it a little bit already today. Location matters a lot. How much revenue they have matters quite a bit. What they're already doing from a marketing perspective matters quite a bit. In fact, I like to see people that are already doing search marketing, social marketing, email marketing. Then I'm not trying to convince them of the value of those things. I'm trying to convince them that we know how to do it in a very efficient and effective way, right? So I find that to be a little bit easier. And then from there, I think it's just always been like, I think retention is the name of this agency game, right? Like we can grow and grow and grow. And I've been a part of companies and I've consulted for companies and I've worked on companies that have actually, I would argue, better sales techniques and tactics than I have. Mine are probably not the best in the industry by a wide margin. We didn't really have like a full-time, let's say, quote unquote salesperson until about a year and a half ago. But I think we've grown effectively because we have very high retention rates in the 90% range. And when you have that, you kind of grow somewhat by default, right? Like, because if you over time you just keep doing a good job for who you have, and then you just keep getting inbound leads, like over time the snowball just gets a little bit bigger. So I think that if I was advising anyone or anyone's listening and like they have a retention problem, I think fixing that is probably your number one priority over trying to fix a marketing or a sales problem. Because I think I've been a part of a lot of companies who fix their marketing and sales problem, never fix their retention problem, and it just in one door out the other. And I think that's the worst thing to do. And that stresses me out, to be honest with you. Like part of the business, I think, and being an entrepreneur is like running the business that you enjoy running, that you like running. And I like high retention. And I'm okay with giving up a few other things maybe on the margins if it means that my retention is high. I can live with that trade-off. Whereas some people may not see it that way. And that's okay.
It's also from a scalability platform. You see this with any type of business. If their cost of acquisition is near zero, then it's like near infinite growth, because at that point it's a referral-based system. On your end, knowing that like you know how powerful paid advertising is, it's interesting that like if you have a client that you're bringing on, like one of the things you would recommend to them is like, okay, let's put a budget towards paid advertising. When you started, did you focus your efforts on just putting money into exposing your company to short-term rental companies? Or was it solely like you just really giving people free information on these forums, on online, offering the value, and then expecting them, some of them at least, to come and take you on as a vendor?
Yeah, that's a good question. We really didn't focus that on advertising buildup, I would say much paid media at all. It's something that we do more of now, but I would say it's still probably, let's say it's less than 1% of our annual revenue, is like dedicated towards us doing advertising. In fact, we just did a webinar about 3 weeks ago. We put a decent amount of money behind that to like let people become aware of it, do some advertising and marketing behind it. But that was probably the most we spent on an ad campaign in a while. And that was still only a few $1,000s. So I find what's interesting about our problem set, like speaking of marketing our company, is that we, unlike a vacational manager who's trying to get a booking, and like as long as that person's a good guest and they're not going to trash the place, etc., they need a lot of bookings, right? They need 100, 200, 300, 400 bookings to come in on a monthly basis to like kind of satisfy their demand and satisfy the properties they have. Most of our clients, we're a little pickier, right? So like it's harder, I would say, for us to use paid advertising to what I call is like to catch the right fish in the net. Like when we've run a lot of paid advertising in the past, we've had what I call a lot of bycatch, which is that we're fishing for redfish, and then we catch a lot of small little minnows in the net, and it's like that's not really what we want. So I think
people that don't have the budgets, people that don't have the property counts that justify it, people that are very, very, very early on in their short-term rental careers that don't even know, they may not know what they're even doing.
Yeah. Well, and like this is one thing that I had a little like sliding doors moment a while ago about this, where I was talking to people and I had like 4 or 5 sales calls like in a row over the course of maybe a week or two or something like that. And I was like, every single company I talked to over the past 2 weeks is smaller than we are from a revenue perspective. And I never thought of us that way. When I started, it was like I was making nothing. I mean, I started and I quit. I had like an $800 retainer, on the book when I started Build Up Bookings. And I was like, that was our revenue, way back then. Now we do a lot more, of course. But at the time I was like, it felt like a switch flipped in my head where it's like, felt a responsibility too, to like not try to sell someone marketing services when that's not really what they need. Like, I think that's something that's somewhat pervasive in our industry, which is like selling people on something that they don't really need. And then a salesperson will sit up there and celebrate, oh, look, I closed 10 people this week and this and that. See my earlier customer retention. Then those people, half them fall out the back door. They're not happy. I think that's a really sort of, I think it's just toxic in our space, particularly companies that are funded by venture capital, because to them, all money is good money, right? Like there's people in our space where I say if they've got a credit card and a pulse, they'll take them as a client. We're a lot more picky. And I think that can lead to slower growth for sure. But I think the trade-off is that we get more of the right people in the door. And I think that's part of the reason why paid for us can be a little bit trickier. I would argue it's the same reason that paid for homeowner acquisition is very tough as well, because paid for a homeowner acquisition, if you have very strict criteria, is like, I only take properties that do $100,000 a year in gross revenue. That's like a comment that clients have made before. It's like, okay, that takes the problem, or that takes the inventory set from 10,000 properties in whatever market, Hilton Head, to 800. That's cool. But it's like, now we have to get in front of 800 people. That's really hard to do with, some forms of advertising. In fact, on Facebook, it's basically impossible, right? If we're being honest. So that's where it gets very tricky when, as you get more and more specific, you find certain techniques, certain tactics start to sometimes lose their effectiveness, or in some case you fall under a threshold where it's like, this just doesn't work anymore. I just don't get in front of the right people in this way. Again, going back to my earlier commentary about like you can only do a few channels well. So you got to focus on the 3 or 4 channels that are really working, put the most of your effort into that. And it's not that you can't, it's like, again, someone's going to say, oh, like we've not focused on Instagram, for example, for build up meaningfully. I know there's people on Instagram in our space that do really well, but for us, it hasn't been something that has worked well. It doesn't mean that Instagram can't work or that it won't work. It just hasn't worked well for me and like my skill set and my, sort of approach. So I'm better off focusing on other things that are working well for me. Again, enjoy doing those things, or have fun doing those things, and maybe I back to Instagram down the road, right? Like that's something, how I think about it.
I think also being in such a niche business vertical, especially in the marketing agency space, your priority should be community building more so than, because with community building, it's a small club, right? In the short-term rental space, in the scheme of things, it's not huge. So if you are really focusing, you're doing like partnerships, getting of other companies in the same space, going to conferences, as you said, like, being a valuable asset on these online communities. That's where you're going to have that's where you're going to capture that really small subset of people that otherwise would cost, huge amounts of money to advertise, to do paid advertising on.
Yeah. And I mean, it's like it's one of those things where I will, like any sort of maybe like ADHD adjacent marketer, I will sometimes look at it and go, well, that's ridiculous. Why can't we figure this out, to where we can run these ads and figure out success? And let's say a few times a year, I'll look back and be like, why aren't we doing this well? Like we just started doing outbound again. We really weren't doing much outbound for a long time. We had done it before. We had some success. We saw some problems with it and we stopped. And now I thought about it and go, is that right? Should we have stopped doing that? And then I thought about it more and I'm like, probably no. So we kind of restarted our outbound engine where we didn't have that running for a long time. So I would argue that's a very different channel for us. We've had to go back and like study, like basically from scratch, everything we did 2 years ago, just delete it, start over. Like nothing there seemed to be the right outcome. Start from scratch. How do we do research? How do we find the right person? How do we find the key decision maker? What way do we reach out? Like we had to basically start over. And then we're trying this again. And I think we've got a much better plan in place and we've got better people in place now than we had 2 years ago from like an infrastructure standpoint. So I have reason to believe it'll be successful, but I fully admit it may not be, like, and that's okay too. Like I think that's part of marketing, is being totally comfortable trying something, even spending a lot of time, effort, energy, and money doing something and then realizing it didn't work. I can live with that. I can always live with that versus trying nothing, or doing nothing, which is unfortunately where I think a lot of small business ends up, is like, I think there's some quote where it's like, it's a Yogi Bear thing, I think, where it's like, we've tried nothing and we're all out of ideas or something like that, which is a common thing that I see in our space, particularly for people that are not marketing focused or not sales focused, they're operation focused. Well, I tried this and it didn't work, so therefore they just stopped doing it. It's like, no, like the answer is always behind like several other no's or like several other failures usually. I don't celebrate failure. I know some people like, oh, you learned something. It's like, sometimes no, sometimes you just fail. And that's okay too. Like it's not the end of the world, but you've got to keep trying, right? Like the one thing that you can't do if you care is like you just give up, right? That's when you do fail, I think, is when you just give up and say, oh, it doesn't work.
I have to say, like, big picture, I do think that the prevalence of these very large OTAs have made short-term rentals very complacent. You don't necessarily need, if you're doing really well, you're getting 70% occupancy and those are flowing in. Like there isn't that thing that pushes you to be sales oriented and oriented. People that are actually taking the time to build a brand, invest in paid advertising, they're positioned much better to have a thriving business in the long run. Because as we went back to that example of Isaac French, you never know when the OTAs will just suspend you or there's a glitch in the system.
Yeah. Well, I think the best story I like here is, are you a barnacle attached to the boat or are you in your own boat? Right. I think if you're a barnacle attached to the Airbnb boat, that's fine, by the way. People are happy with that and they're pleased with what they're getting from an occupancy standpoint, from a revenue standpoint. If they're happy with all the disputes they have in Airbnb and their success rate with those disputes and they have no trouble with it, I have no problem with it. Like if that's what people want to do, that's okay with me. I don't like, I'm not like a religious person here to convert you to my beliefs. You know what I mean? Like I'm not here to do that kind of thing. I think you have to come to that of your own volition, of your own accord. I'm happy to speak to like what I've seen, like the results, the benefits they've seen from it. I think all of our clients that have done this for a long period of time that end up getting 50% direct bookings are so thankful that they've ended up making that choice. But there is some investment to be made there. There's some steps you have to make that are uncomfortable. There might be moments where you make no progress for 2 months, or a Google update kind of knocks you back. Like you were making progress, then you get chipped back a little bit. Those things all happen. But to your point, it's like, are you here for a short time, like just a good time, or are you here for a long time, right? To build a company that's going to be more sellable down the road, or it's going to have more stability to it, or you can charge more actually on direct bookings. You make a lot more in direct booking. Which is something that people don't really talk about too much. They just look at the low customer acquisition cost of Airbnb because the guest funds much of it, and they just shrug their shoulders. Oh, I can't do it better for 3%. And they just kind of give up. So yeah, like my belief is like, I'm not here to change your opinion, but just realize like if you're a barnacle attached to the Airbnb boat, if that boat sinks, you're going down with it, or you can get chopped off the boat at any moment in time. If you're cool with that and that doesn't bother you at all, I say go for it. But I think if you study it carefully and you think about, not in terms of the next year, but in terms of the next 5 years, the next 10 years, I think most people will come to different conclusions, but some people just don't ever see it that way. And that's okay. Like I said, I don't try to change people's mind too much.
How important is the patience factor in your ICP, your ideal customer profile in your business? Like, you talk to different clients on a weekly basis, potential prospects. Do you have like a line of questioning with them to say, like, are you looking for results in the next month, or are you willing to wait a year? Because I feel like that, especially even with my own marketing team, when I first started Delegate, I had a background. I had a background knowledge where I knew that SEO is going to take time. I knew that brand building, it's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of consistent online interacting with people. When you're dealing with those prospects, what's that conversation like with them? To them, like the lay of the land, like this isn't going to happen within 2 weeks.
I think having those expectation conversations are always challenging. I think I've done a bad job at this in the past, and I think we've improved on it a little bit recently. One thing that we've done is actually give people in onboarding, we talk a little bit about these sliders, where it's like, for example, one of our sliders on our intake form is, I'm okay to spend more, even if it means my profitability is low or limited. So there's kind of that slider of like, I'm okay to spend more if it means profitability is low or limited. And then there's a slider where it's like, I prefer to be very conservative. Show me the most profitable campaigns, even if it means we make, slower progress. I forget exactly what the copy is on it. But it's something like that. And then I let people pick, like, what do you think? Like, what's your take on this? And there's no right or wrong answer here. It's not a yes or no. It's not a, pass fail. It's like, what's your perspective? How do you think about it? And we've had great clients that have been very conservative, and they're like, I only want to focus on the most profitable campaigns. I'm willing to spend less just to like see the results and kind of make progress in this way, little small stair steps. And then I've had people that are like, we had a call the other week where it's like, we're spending $100 a day and he wasn't happy. Oh, there has to be more that we can spend. There has to be more budget that we can deploy. We want, like, we're getting leads. So can we do, if we double the budget, will we get double the leads? Right. And the answer in this case was probably no, because we kind of reached out kind of a mass velocity for that particular campaign. But it was a different mindset than the other person, that we could talk to. So I think it's incumbent on you as the owner. And this is where I'm giving myself some, demerits. I wasn't doing a great job at this, of trying to suss that out. And sometimes people aren't like really intellectually honest about it. I think like they may say something that indicates they want to grow, they want to get some level of success, they want to get to a certain property count, or they want to get to a certain revenue number. But then when you talk through or explain what might be needed on the marketing side to get there, then they start to like get a little tense and get a little worried. And sometimes you have to like feel them out a little bit of like, well, here's what I suggest. What do you think about that budget? And that's kind of why, going back to the earlier comment about like who we look for, is if they're already spending money on these things, it's usually easier to like look at it and see, here's how we would do it differently. That's usually an easier conversation to have than like someone that's going from spending $0 to spending, just pick a number, right? $3,000 a month on marketing and advertising. Yeah. That feels like a big change, right? It's like, oh, that's another $36,000 a year, blah, blah, blah. If they're already spending money on ads, it's really just like deploy it more effectively. That's always an easier conversation, I think, to have with that prospect or that person. So not to like break the fourth wall too bad if people are listening, their clients or prospective clients. But it's like, I think some people, they mean well, or they want business to do well, but they haven't always thought about those questions. And sometimes when you get the call, it just can like be a little off-putting, where you're like, I feel this way sometimes people ask me where I want to go, and I'm like, I don't know. Like I have some rough ideas, but it's like, ask me again today, ask me in 2 weeks from now, I might have a slightly different opinion. So like, we've got to figure out what's working well for you right now. We've got to pivot along the way. And what I say about things like budgets is, let's write them in pencil, not pen, so we can change them if we need to. That's like something I've always said about that, side of it, how people want to deploy their budget, because they might want to be like my other client, doubling their budget the other week, and then the other client saying, hey, it's off season, let's go ahead and cut everything back. Like, this is when we're going to see a lot less bookings, let's be conservative. And they're both right, because they both have different goals. You know what I mean?
Yeah. How often are those conversations happening? Because there are certain campaigns that you kind of, you put it in place, and then you tweak here and there, but for lack of a better term, it's like not it's passive in the sense that you keep a campaign, a certain price that you put in. How often, I guess it depends on the situation, but how often are you touching base in this type of line of business? How often do you touch base with your clients, make tweaks to these campaigns?
Yeah, I would say for us, a large client is weekly. We have several
Yeah,
clients that have weekly standing calls where it's like, all right, we have enough data or we have enough volume of things going on where like maybe we can skip a week on a certain thing. Like, all
yeah,
right, like we have a client that I'm talking to tomorrow where it's like, this is our low season. And I'm like, we don't need
yeah,
to talk about ads. Like we're spending so little right now. It's not a
yeah,
big deal. But then in summer, it's like every week is like the first thing on the agenda is like, all right, we spent $18,000 last week collectively across all the brands. Like, what are we doing about ads? Is
yeah,
everything in good shape? Like, are we okay? So it's
yeah,
every single week through the whole summer of like what's going on, right? So weekly, I think in my mind is like that marketing team that's spending multiple people involved. You're spending 10, 15, 20, 30, $40,000 plus per month. I think it's weekly cadence. Now for people that are most small businesses, and that's not the majority of our clients that are at that level of spend and stuff like that, I think a bi-weekly or monthly is probably perfectly fine. And I think one thing that I'm a big believer in too is not collecting a whole long list of things for a monthly call, but just like chipping away at it each week. Like if you've got we have clients where it's like we send a newsletter and it's like if you have a sense of what those feature properties should be on the next newsletter, just send them now. Like let's not wait another month and then you get them there, because then we're kind of scrambling and rushing a little bit, and we're going to give you a better product. Like if you communicate more frequently but like less information, I feel like is actually a better way. So I think like if I could choose between like one 30-minute call every other week and 1 hour long call every month, I would feel like I would get much better results from one 30-minute call every other week, because we can check the pulse, even though the time spent is identical. I think there's
yeah,
a lot more to learn from that than, oh, I'm going to do something once a month. Or we have clients where it's like, they don't book their calls. I'll be honest with you. We have clients that don't book their calls regularly, even though we make
yeah.
every option available to them. We reach out to them, booking the calls. And I don't love it, to be honest with you. It's fine for my business. Like my business doesn't feel significantly impacted from that, particularly if they're, happy clients and they're, paying their invoices and things like that. But I don't love it because I feel like it's putting them in not the greatest spot to succeed. And I don't like to fall short, what we've offered to them. If we offer them a call and they don't take it, once or twice is fine. But if they're doing that all the time, I just feel like it puts us on less even ground for success.
I think also from a customer retention standpoint, it's so important to have that regular touch base, because you need to continuously show your clients that you're providing value. And I mean, you could do that through reports, you can do that through regular email updates, but there's something different about having those touch bases in person or over a Zoom call with a customer success manager, just to make sure that they understand, hey, we're here working for you. This is especially true in any sort of service-based business, like a marketing agency, something like we do at Delegate, where we're staffing, doing managed staffing for um, various types of companies. The happiest clients are those that know that we're working day in and day out for their needs.
Yeah. I'm a big believer that like you're going to be judged on the output and like what the result is. That's what you're going to be judged on long term. But short term, you're going to be judged a little bit more on like effort and like consistency and like activity. Like those are things that people are going to look more week to week, maybe month to month. They're going to look at that over the course of a year. Like if it was, we don't have contracts, so like a lot of people in our space will have like a year-long contract. Well, at the end of the day, they're going to sit there a year later and judge like, am I in a better spot now than I was a year ago? Is my traffic better? Am I getting more conversions? Am I getting more revenue? All those things, right? Is my email list bigger? That's how you be judged a year from now. But along the way, they're going to make all these like little micro judgments or these little micro opinions based on how one little campaign went, or how, we have a client, for example, the other day, and this was my fault. We accidentally opted into Facebook. You may have seen this, has like an AI copy, basically checkbox that they like almost trick you into checking. And like, it was a mistake. It was an accident. We didn't mean to. We opted into that like copy box. And I was like, shoot, like then they saw copy that really wasn't what was approved. They were a little bit upset, but we fixed it in 9 minutes. And I was like, in a weird way, that actually made the client like us more, because we made the mistake. It was 100% our fault, but we fixed it in like 10 minutes. When they sent in the email to the time that AI copy was removed, it was about 10 minutes. And they were like, oh, like, thank you for fixing it so quickly. We appreciate that. Like, obviously we caught this. We wanted to fix it quickly. And I'm like, yeah, that's our mistake. That's my fault. My apologies. We'll get it right next time. I'll change our little process internally to make sure it didn't happen again. But it's like in a weird way that actually endeared the client to us more, that we made a mistake and then fixed it quickly, that if no mistake had been made. Not that if you're listening, you shouldn't go make mistakes on purpose and then fix it quickly. Of course, that was unintentional. But it's like moments like that where you can actually like show, like, to your point, kind of your value, or show like that, hey, you're there, you're trying to be responsive and stuff like that. And I think those things matter quite a bit. I think there's one thing that universally a client's going to hate, which is simple question, or they want one report, one number, one static piece of information, and it's a week to get back to them. Even if there's a good reason for it to take a week, sometimes they're asking for things that aren't possible to get automatically. We have to go pull a bunch of reports and combine it together or something like that, or we have to build something custom, or we've had APIs go down. We're trying to send a report. This happens sometimes at the beginning of a month, and then the Google Ads API goes down because a billion people are trying to hit it and generate reports all at once. And it's like, well, all those things are true, but it's like the client doesn't want to hear that, right? What they want to hear is like, here's the problem, here's what we're doing to fix it, or like, we can send this report tomorrow, hopefully once the API is back up. Those are all things that clients want to hear, not like, oh yeah, just like nothing. Like crickets, I think, is like the worst thing to do in a lot of our systems.
I've realized that too. Like, so we've actually built our processes around that, especially when we're finding, let's say we're finding a candidate for a marketing company or a marketing agency, and they need a video editor. And the video editor the specifications is they need to be proficient in these types of tools. It might take, an extra 3 days, 4 days for us to source and start interviewing for that position. And if you're waiting those extra 3 or 4 days and the client is hearing crickets, it's showing them like that in their head, even though in the background we're doing the work, we're going through the process, they feel like they're not getting the value that they paid for. And so my whole mantra is like update along all along the customer journey. That way, even if the end product or service is not there, at least they understand that work being done in the back end to get them to their desired result or outcome.
Yeah. We use Basecamp for our project management, and one thing we did a while ago is I try to expose as much of that Basecamp project as possible to the client. Now, there's some things we keep hidden. Like I don't love when clients see little comments about like, oh, that looks wrong and this and that. Like I think that can make us look kind of incompetent at times, and that's just normal editing and stuff like that, right? So there's some things we keep hidden, but we try to reveal a lot just so they can see like, hey, here was our team chatting back and forth about this thing, and they get a summary report from Basecamp about what's going on, and always like kind of those types of things. I think that's an area that we can continue to improve on, to be honest with you. Is like one thing we talked about with link building is like link building can be a lot of outreach and no wins for like a little period of time. So it's like, man, I reached out to 100 sites and I went 0 for 100, and it happens in link building, right? That doesn't happen so much in sales, but it happens in link building. And it's like all the client sees is 0 links, which is true. Like again, judge on your outcomes and your results. So I think that we deserve, maybe some criticism if that were the case. Reach out to 100 sites and get no links, but we reach out to 100 sites, right? Like that was part of the process. That's one side of it. The second thing I'll say to that is like, I think this is a tie-in. Marcin has taught me about this before. The root of most unhappiness is unmet expectations. So if you don't know what their expectations are, and then you don't meet them, then it's like that's when you're in hot water, right? Whereas like if you told them, hey, it's going to take actually a month for us to source a video editor for you, like we're going to search, but like here's the process we go through. We reject 90% of applicants that apply, so it makes it hard to find a video editor. These people are high in demand, et cetera, et cetera. But you and I both know it's going to take 2 or 3 weeks, and then you deliver it in 3 weeks, they're actually thrilled. If you said nothing and delivered in 3 weeks, they're actually pissed. So it's like the same outcome, but it's like the expectations that you had and you set can make a big difference. So yes, when I talk to clients, it is like, hey, our expected open rates here are 15%, 20%, and then they end up being 25. Awesome. We're now like in the green, even though the result is the same. So not that I like try to sandbag everything, but I think there's something to the effect of like, try to build yourself a little buffer room. I feel it's the same way with our clients. Like, I think you got to be careful over editing photos of vacation rentals. I think you can over edit them and set the wrong expectations for a client. They look at something that's perfect, it's amazing. Then you get there and it kind of doesn't live up to the hype. And then you end up with a lot of 4s and 3s on the review side. It actually kills your business. But in that moment of putting up the awesome photo that's edited, it looks good in that moment. And then, 4 months later, you're like, I really regret doing that. I actually ended up with a lot of negative reviews. So, I think you've got to like kind of explain just a little bit and over deliver, that 20% more. And then I think you're generally in like a healthier spot long term.
I feel like that is something as a business owner, you learn from, like, you learn over time from making mistakes where you try to over deliver or over promise, I should say, to clients. Because in the early days, you are like, yeah, we could do that. Yeah, that's fine. We could do that. And then as time progresses and you have to standardize the service or that you're trying to build for the customer, you realize that there's so much benefit to under promising and over delivering. But it's only because then you've developed the discipline to say, like, I'm not trying to catch all the fish in the sea. I'm trying to catch like just the really big ones.
Yeah, and I think it's maybe it's just like the evolution that everyone has to go through. I was listening like you, I was listening to a podcast the other day. It's frustrating when you spend hours and months or whatever working on a problem, and then you realize like Warren Buffett figured it out 50 years ago or something like that. And it's like I feel that way sometimes where I like bound my head against the wall and like spend a lot of time trying to figure out a better way of doing things. And then I'm like, yeah, I could have just copied this other company
Yeah,
that did it that way, and like they just figured it out. Maybe I don't need to reinvent the wheel, so to speak. But maybe it's just a pain we have to put ourselves through to like get the right outcome. Maybe.
yeah, definitely. I want to end on talking a little bit about. I know we touched upon the team building in the past, and from when you started one of your first hires, a hire from the Philippines. Just kind of want to touch upon that. What has the role of delegation been to your business thus far and the growth of your business, and how impact has hiring overseas talent on your trajectory now, looking back a few years?
Yeah. I mean, I think I don't even know what led me to that decision originally, other than like seeing some marketing advertising and realizing like I need help. It's these projects I feel like weren't super difficult, right? And I kind of maybe dipped my toe into the offshore hiring stuff back when I was at a previous agency that I worked for. We did a little bit of that, but I think candidly we didn't manage it well. So I think that was kind of one mistake that I made was assuming and going for incredibly low price labor offshore. I think is one of the worst things to do. Now I have the complete opposite mindset. Like the person asking for the most money offshore is probably the best person. It's particularly if they were, getting pay like that elsewhere, and there's usually a good reason for it. And yeah, I mean, I said this, in our pre-show before we recorded, and I can say it again. Some of the worst hires I made have been people based in the U.S. And they've been the most harmful to my business, or they made the least progress, or they weren't the best outcome for me as a business owner. So this idea that you can only find great people in the US is just obviously not true. Like there's so many great companies, amazing companies that are on the Fortune 50 list that have teams and teams and teams of offshore people to do all sorts of projects and stuff like that. So I think the mindset shifted on that though is my take on it. So when I did it in 2018 or back in that time frame, it wasn't as popular as it is today. Like a lot of things have shifted over the past, let's say 6 or 7 years on that. By the way, that person's still with me today. I know I said that in the pre-show, but yeah, I think that's worth mentioning because I think if you find someone great offshore, they're actually really thankful and happy to have that job. And if you're paying them well, they want to keep working for you for a long period of time. So I think there's a certain, I don't know if commitment is the right word. I don't know if I love that word loyalty. I don't like this idea of like, I don't know if I like this idea that like we're a family. I don't think that's true. I have a family. My people who work with me are colleagues. I respect them, but we're not family. Family is something different in my mind. So I don't like that mindset either, to be honest with you. But
They're team members.
yeah. Yeah. Like I think, and I played sports and stuff like that growing up. I don't know if you did too. I have a lot of respect and admiration for people on my team, even if I didn't like them. But when you play the game or whatever you're into, in that moment, you have to figure out how to work together. So it's like, I know there's people on my team who see the world very differently. I know there's people on my team who have completely polar opposite political views. But you know what? They still actually work perfectly well together, perfectly fine together. And that's okay. Like we don't have to be the same or work exactly the same way to be, successful. So I think when it comes to like building an offshore team, I think it's actually looking for the best people, not the cheapest people. That's a mistake I did make a few times, early on, and that was something I had to learn from. The person asking for the most is probably the best, usually, not always, but like usually they are. So it's worth figuring out why are you asking the most. The way people present themselves early on tells you everything you need to know, though. In my mind, you see a great resume, you see a nicely formatted resume website, you see their profile picture is just, I don't care what they look like, but just they have one. They put effort into what they're actually putting out into the world. I did a call recently when I ended up hiring her with someone based in Colombia. And in her first call with me, first interview, first time we ever chatted, her virtual background was the logo of my company. And I was like, that took several minutes. I mean, maybe to research and set that up. Maybe it took 10 minutes or something like that. But I'm like, you didn't do that by accident, whereas like, I kid you not, I've been on the phone with US based people who I hopped on the interview with them and they go, wait, what am I interviewing for again? Like they've said that as like one of the first lines of the interview. And I'm just like, that's just brutal. I mean, that's so bad. So, I think that there's so many great people out there. I think it is this, I do now have someone that's helping me, source and kind of find those people. And I'm assuming you do something similar. I think that does help a lot because you'll have to weed through, you got to kiss a lot of frogs to find your prince or princess, right? When it comes to hiring. And I think that's the one thing that can be problematic still, whether it's onshore or offshore, is like finding the right people can be hard. So I think having filters in place, having like letting the best people get to you is probably the best way of doing it. But then once you're talking to that person, wherever they happen to be, I have a blank slate in my mind of like, what can this person help me with? How can they help my business? And then I try to think of what role they fit into. And maybe it's one, maybe it's two, maybe it's multiple things. Maybe it's just, a few things that they can do well. And then, how can we make it work together? How can it be? I'm a big believer in win-win. And a lot of people say that. I really try to take to heart. How can it be a win for you and a win for me? And I think so many relationships don't start that way. It's like, how can I get one over on you? How can I negotiate your rate lower? How can I do this? How can I do that? I think if you approach it win-win, you actually can get to a better outcome.
100%. I feel as if a lot of startups, people that they're starting out, they see the cost benefit of overseas, and they think that if they're going to get immense value out of a person that they're getting a very low rate, when in reality, if you are offering them a higher salary, more benefits, um, there's a reason that they're getting paid that much. It's because they're good. They're good at what they do. I made the same mistake early on, is at price point, and then later realized that even if I pay someone 50% more, it's still going to be more value than if I were to hire that person in New York City, for example. Not to mention the benefits and the insurance and the employment ramifications of that hire.
Yeah. And to be clear, like I fully anticipate hiring many people based in the US in the coming years, as we grow or as we find new roles and opportunities. Like I think there's a lot of different layers to our company, what we're doing. And I think a lot of for example, our sales layer is very focused in the US, like people who are selling things. And then typically like the further you get away from client communication, the less I think sometimes that, proximity matters to the US. And certainly there's some things where I think it doesn't matter at all. And in fact, there's great people who have different cultural, we talked about this in the pre-show, but like certain cultures seem to do better with certain types of tasks, certain types of projects. Some people are more confrontational, some people are more passive. Sometimes you want that. Sometimes you want someone to be a little more confrontational. Sometimes that really passive can be a bad thing. If you're hiring someone to deal with guest complaints and they just kind of lay over and do whatever the guest says and you're in the vacational industry, that could be really bad for your business. You know what I mean? Like so I think you've got to sometimes work through, what some of those objectives look like what's the output, we talked about that, like what's the output of what that person needs to do, and then just come at it with an open mind and realize, what would it look like to pay someone, for example, what would it look like to pay someone $3,000 but they're based in a country where the average salary is $1,500? Well, again, to your point, you might end up getting the best person for that role, and that's like what feels like it probably is roughly minimum wage in New York is paying someone $40,000 a year, right? Like it probably is. I don't even know what that would look like. So what kind of quality person are you going to get for your company in both those situations? Well, it depends on what you're trying to do. If you need someone to clean a property in New York City, then you're going to have to find someone in New York City to do that, right? If you're trying to find someone to format spreadsheets and run sales reports and do all these things, you may find the best sales reporter there was that worked for a Fortune 25 company and they happen to be based in Manila. Who cares, right? If the job is getting done. So I think just opening your mind in that way and just thinking, how can I get this done, in the best way possible, will lead you to new horizons. But I think if you come at it from that mindset, I think you can get a lot of wins, from it. And some of the best people we've hired have been, if anything, on their expectation salary range, put some of the highest numbers that we felt we were comfortable spending.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, doing some payments early on overseas and being like, wow, I'm paying this person almost as much as I would pay someone maybe in the US, and then realizing that's okay though, because they're much better than someone in the US, or someone in the US with their skill set would make triple what this person would make, and it actually works out well on both sides. Like they're winning and I'm winning out of this deal.
And there's longevity, because most likely they're looking at that opportunity and saying, like, this is a company I want to stay at. I am getting paid in the 99th percentile of salaries in my country, and I'm living a very I have a very good quality of life. To sum it up, I have a story. I worked with a developer years ago. At the time I was building my own PMS, which that's another story. But
tough one there.
Yeah, but we had hired a developer from, the average salary there is, or the average hourly is like $1 and something, $2 maybe, and this developer was getting paid $30 an hour, and we were joking around with him. I was like, so how well are you doing in your city in Pakistan? He's like, well, I've got multiple houses. I go on the weekends to the beach house, and I'm like, this guy has a very good quality of life, but he's also really good at what he does. So with that,
it can be funny when you study it and you realize that some of these people, not that they have a better quality of life than people in the States, but like to your point, it's like if you're living in the top 1%, 2% in a given, culture or environment, then you may end up having what some people would be very jealous of who live in the States. So it's sort of a weird little moment. But yeah, to your point, it's like if they're worth it and you're winning and they're winning, what's wrong with that? Isn't that kind of it's not the fun part of entrepreneurship a little bit? It's fun to win. It's fun to get some success for yourself and stuff like that. But is it fun to see the people you're working with enjoy it and have a good time along the way? Like, I hope so. I enjoy that. You know what I mean? Like that person that I was talking before we record that worked for me that bought a house last year. Like she bought a house because of the money I gave her, and she deserved it. She earned it. You know what I mean? Like she didn't have a house before. I mean, she was renting, and now she has her own house. That's awesome. Like that's a good thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it makes you feel it's the other side of the wins. Like, you have wins getting clients and whatnot, but then you realize that you're making an impact on the people around you, their lives. Not because of the work that they're putting in. Obviously, they deserve it. They're helping you grow your business, but it makes you feel good inside.
Yeah. I mean, that's like I said, if you're doing something that you enjoy, because the people you work with, like the clients, the team members, I mean, of course I have bad days, everybody has bad days, but I just try to limit them. You know what I mean? Whereas I feel like when I worked for other people, I was always at their direction of how they want to do things. And I think so many people that I work for just like had such deep and, really troubling flaws, in how they approached it. And maybe I'm wrong and they're right. And maybe they just, hey, I'm cool with you leaving because I want to do it my way. And that's fine too. But I think that's like, I never had this vision of being a billionaire or that sort of thing, right? Starting my own business and taking over the world. I just want to do things my way. Like that's been my jam this whole time. I just want to do things my way and along the way. So we can end it there, but that's my parting thought too.
Cool, man. Well, for those of you that viewed this, you're interested in learning more about Conrad and his company. Conrad, tell us, where can people find you?
Yeah, I think the website's the best way. So if you go to buildupbookings.com, you can reach out there. We've got a getting started, page. Click on the top right corner. One of those lovely sales professionals I talked about a few minutes ago will, love to chat with you and see if we can help you out. We have a course we launched last year. So if you go to courses.buildupbookings.com, or you go to buildupbookings.com and click the navigation, there's a course up there. If you're looking for more of that self-paced, like you don't want services, you want to do it yourself, obviously a much lower price point. Some people enjoy that. And then last year I wrote a book called Mastering Vacational Marketing. So that's kind of like, if you want to spend $15 but get a lot of the knowledge that I've shared or that I've learned over the last few years, that would be a good way of doing it. So Amazon, just search Mastering Vacational Marketing, Conrad O'Connell. I'm sure it'll come right up. There's not many Conrad O'Connells in the world, so that makes it easy. And you can support us in that way. Check out the book. And I do have my own podcast as well, Blendi. So maybe we could drop a link there in the show notes. If you go to buildupbookings.com, click on the show tab in the top, and then you'll see the podcast that I do with Paul Manzi. So lots of different ways.
All right. Love to hear that. For everyone watching, thank you again for joining us on another episode of the Sip and Scale podcast. We'll see you next time.